What happens when two of late-night television's biggest personalities clash in front of a live studio audience, and one of them refuses to back down from what might be the most uncomfortable interview ever broadcast? Well, you're about to find out. Because what went down between Conan O'Brien and Jimmy Kimmel on Jimmy Kimmel Live became the stuff of television legend, and not for the reasons anyone expected. Before we dive into this absolute train wreck of an interview, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Because trust me, you're going to want to discuss this one with other people who witnessed this career-defining moment. It all started when Conan O'Brien walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set with his trademark confidence. That familiar shock of red hair, perfectly styled, wearing a sharp navy suit that screamed expensive. The studio audience erupted in applause, clearly excited to see the former Tonight Show host and current podcast king make his appearance. Jimmy Kimmel, sitting behind his desk in his usual spot, flashed what looked like a genuine smile. But those who knew him well might have noticed something slightly forced about it. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Conan O'Brien," Jimmy announced, his voice carrying that practiced television enthusiasm that had made him a household name. Conan strode across the stage with his characteristic long strides, waving to the crowd before settling into the guest chair with a casual lean that suggested he was completely at ease. Dialogue. "Conan, Jimmy, thanks for having me." Adjusting his tie. "Though I have to say, your green room coffee tastes like it was brewed in a gym sock that someone forgot in a locker for 3 months." The audience laughed. Jimmy chuckled. Everything seemed perfectly normal, standard Conan humor. The kind of self-deprecating, yet oddly specific observation that had endeared him to millions of fans over the decades. "Jimmy, well, we spend our budget on more important things." His smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Like making sure our show actually gets renewed every year." There was a pause, just a fraction of a second too long, where Conan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The audience didn't catch it, still riding the wave of laughter from the coffee joke. But something had just changed in the dynamic between these two men. Conan, renewal anxiety. His voice carrying that practiced lightness that comedians use when they're dancing around something serious. "I remember those days. Actually, I remember when network executives used to return my phone calls too. Funny how things change." Jimmy leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against his desk in a rhythm that seemed slightly too fast. "Jimmy, well, some of us adapt better than others to the changing landscape of television. Some of us find new ways to stay relevant, instead of, retreating to podcasting." The word podcasting came out with just enough emphasis to make it clear that Jimmy didn't consider it quite on the same level as network television. Conan's eyebrows raised slightly. Anyone who had followed his career knew that particular expression meant he was processing something that had just crossed a line. "Conan, retreating?" Slowly, as if tasting the word. "That's an interesting way to put it. I prefer to think of it as choosing a medium where I can actually say what I want to say, without some network suit telling me I can't make jokes about their advertisers." Jimmy, must be nice to have that luxury. His television smile still plastered on his face, but his tone growing sharper. "Some of us have responsibilities. Employees depending on us. Real stakes." The studio audience was starting to sense that something was off. The laughter was becoming more scattered, more uncertain. These weren't the friendly jabs that usually characterized late-night television interviews. There was real tension crackling between these two men, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. Conan shifted in his chair, his long frame unfolding as he leaned forward slightly. "Conan, real stakes?" His voice carrying that particular Conan inflection that suggested he was about to deliver something cutting. "Jimmy, do you want to talk about real stakes? Because I seem to remember a certain someone who spent years kissing up to network executives, while other people were taking actual risks with their comedy." Jimmy's smile faltered for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "Jimmy, taking risks? Is that what you call having the Tonight Show handed to you, and then losing it 7 months later?" The words hung in the air like a physical presence. The studio audience fell completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something that was supposed to happen behind closed doors, not in front of cameras and a live audience. Conan's face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, hurt, and then something that looked dangerously like anger. "Conan, handed to me?" Quietly, his voice carrying a new edge that his fans had rarely heard. "Jimmy, you want to go there? Really? Because I seem to remember earning that job through 15 years of writing and performing, not by riding Adam Carolla's coattails into a television career. Jimmy's face flushed slightly, his carefully maintained television composure starting to crack. Jimmy, at least I didn't crash and burn spectacularly enough to become a cautionary tale about what happens when someone gets promoted beyond their abilities. The gloves were officially off now. What had started as standard late-night banter had devolved into something personal, something ugly. And both men seemed incapable of stepping back from the edge they had found themselves on. Conan's famous height seemed even more pronounced as he straightened up in his chair, his presence suddenly feeling more imposing. Conan, by my abilities? His voice getting quieter in that way that suggested he was getting angrier. Jimmy, let's talk about abilities. Let's talk about who actually writes their own material, and who has a room full of writers crafting every supposedly spontaneous moment of their show. Jimmy, everyone has writers, Conan. He snapped, his television persona completely gone now, replaced by something raw and less polished. The difference is, some of us know how to work with them, instead of alienating everyone we come into contact with. Conan, alienating? His voice rising for the first time. That's rich, coming from someone whose own staff members have gone on record about what a nightmare you are to work for when the cameras aren't rolling. The studio had gone dead silent. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was two successful men publicly destroying each other on live television, and everyone in that room knew they were witnessing something that would have consequences far beyond this single interview. Jimmy stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the silent studio. You know what, Conan? I think we're done here. But Conan wasn't finished. He remained seated, looking up at Jimmy with an expression that mixed fury with something that might have been disappointment. Oh, we're just getting started, Jimmy. Because I think it's time someone called you out on the act you've been putting on for years. Called out on what act? Jimmy demanded, his voice carrying a sharp edge that his television audience had never heard before. His hands were pressed flat against his desk, knuckles white with tension. What exactly are you implying, Conan? Conan finally stood up, his impressive height making him tower over Jimmy, even with the desk between them. The studio lights caught the intensity in his eyes as he looked directly at his host. I'm not implying anything, Jimmy. I'm saying it outright. You've built an entire career on pretending to be the nice guy, the relatable everyman, when everyone in this industry knows exactly what you're really like. The camera operators were clearly getting signals from the control room, but they kept rolling, perhaps sensing that this was the kind of television moment that defined careers. The studio audience sat frozen, caught between fascination and discomfort as they watched two entertainment giants tear each other apart. And what am I really like, Conan? Jimmy asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Please enlighten us all. Share your deep insights about my character. Conan took a step closer to the desk, his presence commanding the entire studio. You want specifics? Let's talk about how you treat your writing staff. Let's talk about the writers who've left your show because they couldn't handle working for someone who takes credit for their work while treating them like disposable commodities. Jimmy's face was turning red now, his carefully constructed television persona completely abandoned. You have no idea what you're talking about. My writers are well compensated and treated with respect. Really? Conan's voice rose, his Irish temper finally showing through. Then why did 3 of your best writers jump ship to work for Stephen Colbert last year? Why did your head writer quit after that incident where you screamed at him in front of the entire staff because a joke didn't land the way you wanted? The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed several times, clearly struggling to find words. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. That's completely out of line, Jimmy finally managed, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. You don't know anything about my working relationships or how I run my show. I know more than you think, Conan shot back, his voice gaining momentum. I know about the meetings where you've badmouthed other hosts behind their backs while smiling to their faces at industry events. I know about how you've actively worked to undermine people you see as competition. Jimmy slammed his hand down on the desk, the sound echoing through the silent studio like a gunshot. That's enough. You come onto my show and have the audacity to attack me personally? This is my house, Conan. Your house. Conan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jimmy, this isn't your house. This is a television studio owned by a network that could replace you tomorrow if your ratings dropped. Don't confuse hosting a show with actually owning something. The personal nature of the attack seemed to hit Jimmy like a physical blow. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and then pure rage. At least I still have a show to host. At least I didn't flame out so spectacularly that I had to retreat to making podcasts for whatever audience I could scrape together. There it is again, Conan said, his voice getting dangerously quiet. The real Jimmy Kimmel. The one who can't stand the idea that someone might be successful without needing the approval of network executives. The one who's so insecure about his own talent that he has to tear down everyone around him. Jimmy came around the desk now, abandoning any pretense of this being a normal interview. The two men stood facing each other in the middle of the stage, their height difference making for a striking visual as the tension between them reached a breaking point. Insecure. Jimmy's voice was barely controlled now. I'm insecure? You're the one who couldn't handle the pressure of hosting The Tonight Show. You're the one who cracked under the weight of expectation and had to be replaced by someone who could actually do the job. Conan's face went white at the mention of his Tonight Show experience. Clearly the deepest wound Jimmy could have chosen to probe. You want to talk about that? Really? Because I seem to remember a certain someone who spent years positioning himself to take advantage of other people's misfortune. What's that supposed to mean? Jimmy demanded, but there was something in his voice that suggested he knew exactly what Conan was implying. It means you've made a career out of being a vulture, Jimmy. Waiting for other people to fail so you can swoop in and benefit from their misfortune. You think people don't see it, but we do. We all see exactly what you are. The words hit Jimmy like physical blows, each accusation landing with devastating precision. His face cycled through emotions so quickly it was almost dizzying to watch. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just bitter because your career peaked 20 years ago, and you can't accept that some of us have continued to grow and evolve. Grow and evolve, Conan repeated, his voice thick with contempt. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like you've grown into exactly the kind of person you used to make fun of, the desperate, insecure television host who will do anything to stay relevant. Jimmy stepped closer, his face inches from Conan's. Now, at least I'm still relevant. At least people still care about what I have to say. When's the last time you were in a conversation about the future of comedy? When's the last time anyone under 30 knew who you were without having to Google you? The attack was brutal and personal, designed to hit Conan where it would hurt most. For a moment, Conan seemed genuinely stunned by the viciousness of it. But then something shifted in his expression, and when he spoke, his voice carried a coldness that was somehow more frightening than anger. Conan replied, You know what, Jimmy? You're right about one thing. I'm not trying to stay relevant to people under 30 by pandering to whatever trend is popular this week. I'm not desperately chasing viral moments and social media engagement because I'm terrified that if I stop performing for 5 minutes, people will realize I don't actually have anything interesting to say. He added with a sharper edge. That's rich coming from someone whose podcast exists solely because no network would give him another chance at television. Jimmy snarled. My podcast exists because I choose to do it. Conan replied, his voice steady despite the fury in his eyes. I don't need the validation of network executives or focus groups or ratings. I don't need to kiss up to advertisers or worry about whether my jokes might offend someone's corporate sponsors. I can just be funny without having to ask permission. Jimmy said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Must be nice to have that luxury. Must be nice to fail upward into a situation where you don't have any real responsibility. Conan's laugh was sharp and humorless. Fail upward? Jimmy, I've been doing comedy since before you knew what a television camera was. I've written for shows, hosted shows, created shows, and entertained millions of people without ever having to compromise my integrity or sell out my principles. Jimmy's voice rose to nearly a shout. Integrity? You want to talk about integrity? What about the integrity of honoring your commitments? What about the integrity of not bad-mouthing your former employers in every interview? Conan shot back. I honored my commitments. I did everything that was asked of me. And when the network decided to make changes, I handled it with more grace than you would have shown in the same situation. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, both men standing in the middle of the stage, gesturing angrily while the studio audience watched in stunned silence. It was clear that years of professional rivalry and personal animosity had finally boiled over into something that neither man could control. Jimmy's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. Grace? You call that grace? You spent months making passive-aggressive comments about NBC in every interview you did. You turned your departure into a public relations campaign designed to make yourself look like a victim. Conan's eyes flashed with genuine anger now, his composure finally cracking completely. A victim, Jimmy? I was a victim. I was promised a job. I took that job in good faith. And then I was pushed out because the network got cold feet about their own decision. But I didn't spend years whining about it or trying to destroy other people's careers out of spite. Unlike some people, Jimmy said, his voice heavy with implication. Unlike some people who can't stand to see others succeed where they failed. Conan's voice rose to a level that seemed to shake the studio. Failed? Jimmy, I didn't fail. I was sabotaged by network executives who didn't have the courage to stand by their own decisions. But you know what? I survived it. I thrived. I found a way to be successful without having to kiss the ring of every corporate suit in Hollywood. Jimmy threw his hands up in exasperation. There you go again with the corporate conspiracy theories. Maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't the network executives. Maybe the problem was that you couldn't adapt to what the audience wanted. Conan's laugh was bitter and sharp. What the audience wanted? Jimmy, you wouldn't know what an audience wanted if they stood up and told you directly. You're so busy focus testing every joke and monitoring social media metrics that you've forgotten how to just be funny. The insult landed like a physical blow. Jimmy's face went through a series of expressions before settling on something cold and determined. Jimmy said, "You know what, Conan? I think this interview is over." Conan said, his voice thick with contempt. Oh, now you want to end it? Now that someone's finally calling you out on your act, you want to run away? How perfectly on brand for you. Jimmy turned toward the camera, his television smile attempting to reassert itself, but failing miserably. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to take a commercial break. No, Conan said firmly, stepping between Jimmy and the camera. We're not taking a break. We're finishing this conversation. The studio audience was completely silent now, watching two entertainment legends destroy each other in real time. The tension was so thick it seemed to have physical weight pressing down on everyone in the room. This is my show, Jimmy said through gritted teeth. I decide when we go to commercial. Conan's voice carried a dangerous edge. Jimmy, this stopped being your show the minute you decided to make it personal. This became something else entirely. Jimmy looked around desperately, clearly seeking some kind of escape from the situation he had helped create. His eyes found the stage manager, who was making frantic cutting motions from the side of the stage. Security, Jimmy called out, his voice cracking slightly. I need security up here. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Conan stared at Jimmy with an expression of pure disbelief, as if he couldn't quite process what he had just heard. Security, Conan repeated slowly. You're calling security on me? On your guest. You're out of line, Jimmy said, but his voice lacked conviction now. You're being hostile and aggressive, and I have a responsibility to my audience and my staff. Conan laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. Jimmy, the only thing you have a responsibility to is your own ego. You started this fight, and now that you're losing it, you want to hide behind security guards. Two large men in suits appeared at the edge of the stage, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but responding to Jimmy's call. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as the surreal scene unfolded before them. Gentlemen, Jimmy said to the security guards, his voice shaking slightly, please escort Mr. O'Brien from the studio. Conan looked at the security guards, then back at Jimmy, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked almost like pity. This is really how you want to handle this? This is really the kind of person you want to be. Just go, Conan, Jimmy said quietly, his earlier anger replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Just leave. Conan straightened to his full height, his presence commanding the entire studio one final time. You know what, Jimmy? I'll leave, but not because you're throwing me out. I'll leave because I can't stand to be in the same room as someone who's become everything wrong with this industry. He turned toward the camera, speaking directly to the audience with the kind of natural charisma that had made him a star. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for witnessing what happens when someone finally tells the truth in Hollywood. It's been educational. The security guard stepped forward, but Conan waved them off. I can find my own way out, thanks. I've been walking through doors longer than either of you have been alive. As Conan strode toward the exit with his characteristic long steps, Jimmy called after him, his voice carrying across the silent studio. This conversation doesn't leave this room, Conan. Conan paused at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. Jimmy, this conversation was broadcast live to millions of people. It's already left the room. With that, he disappeared into the wings, leaving Jimmy standing alone on his own stage, facing a studio audience that had just watched him destroy his own reputation in real time. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of equipment humming and the distant murmur of confused voices from the control room. Jimmy looked around at the faces staring back at him, all of them reflecting the same mixture of shock and disappointment. He opened his mouth several times as if to speak, but no words came out. Finally, he managed to croak out, "We'll be right back after these messages." But everyone in that studio knew that some things couldn't be fixed by a commercial break, and some damage couldn't be undone by clever editing or public relations spin. What had just happened between Conan O'Brien and Jimmy Kimmel was the kind of moment that defined careers and revealed character. And there was no taking it back. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen two celebrities go at each other this brutally on live television? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more incredible behind-the-scenes stories from the world of entertainment.